Eddy page, you're not going on PPP's page?
My page.
Eddy Layne.
Okay, well, you continue after the time or donate? You continue. Hello there, very good evening and welcome to Transition into Government. I'm your host, Eddy Layne, and I have with me joining me this evening, Joe Hamilton and Priya Manickchand. Joe, Priya, good evening and welcome to the program.
Hi, Eddy, good evening.
All right, so in the last few hours, we have had some developments with regards to the national recount exercise. I think it's now public knowledge that the Chief Elections Officer would have submitted his reports to the Guyana Elections Commission's chair, Justice Retired Claudette Singh. And there are a number of issues that would have derived as a result of that submission. Among them is if we can go back a little to talk about following the actual count of the ballots, which ended sometime last week, I think last Monday, if I'm correct. It lasted for 33 days in total. Following that, there are some other stages of the exercise that are to be completed. One includes the preparation of a report by the Chief Elections Officer, who then submit that to the chair of GECOM. The commission would meet, have their discussions of the report, following which the final and official declaration of the results will be made. The CEO, however, has certain legal parameters within which he should operate when putting together or compiling his report and or submitting that report to the chair of GECOM. I want to bring you in here first, Priya, if we can start on the basis of what is required of the chair before we get into the details of what he actually presented.
Right. Good night, Eddy. Good night, Joe, and good night to all our viewers. I know people are very anxious because, again, today people's hopes were dashed. And by hopes, I mean the belief that human beings and citizens of this country will act professionally and act to preserve our democracy and the gains that we've made as a country. And so people are very disappointed tonight. I say to you, don't, I can't say don't be disappointed, but I say don't worry, because there's only so far, in my view, evil and wrong can go. And there's always going to be an end to it. What we have to do is resolve that nobody's going to break our spirit enough to take from us the fight we have in us. And I could to resist that kind of bullyism and theft of our very rights. And I could say to you without any hesitation, without any doubt, the PPP is going nowhere. This is a fight we are committed to seeing to its very end, because it means so very much. It's much more than gaining power and winning an election. This is now a fight for a very right to elect a government of our choice. And if that right is eroded, other rights will go with it as quicker than we can blink. And we cannot allow that as a country. So we aren't going anywhere. We're going to be here to the end of this fight, and we're going to do all that is necessary to resist this and face it down and make sure this does not infect our entire country. So rest assured that we are here with you, and we want to know, and we feel very comforted to know that you are here with us also. So Eddy, what happened here is they spent 23 days recounting, the GECOM hosting a recount that costs us a hell of a lot of money, billions of dollars for that matter. And there was a process, and there was, what was supposed to happen was Mr. Lowenfield, the Chief Election Officer of the Guyana Election Commission, was to do two things: tally up, count up, tabulate the numbers that everybody saw publicly coming out of the recount, which we all know what they were. The PPPC got 233,336 votes, and the APNU got 217,920 votes. The whole world saw that because it was done live. So really all Mr. Lowenfield had to do was sit down and add up the 10 numbers that would give him these numbers. And then he had to do a summary of the report, the observations that were made during the period. Now, he's done the first one. He has summed up the figures, and he has presented the figures as they came in the recount that the world saw. It was very difficult for him to do anything else because we all saw that live as it was happening. And there were eyes, eagle eyes and other eyes all over the place when that was happening. So we know for sure that these were the numbers, and there was nothing he could do with those numbers. The other thing that he was supposed to do was literally summarize the observations that were being made. Now, you would recall that after the AP and UAFC attempted to steal the election using one Mr. Claremont Mingo and his padding of numbers in favor of the AP and UAFC, after that didn't work out, and after the court action that they sought through their candidates to stop the recount didn't work out, they came to the recount, and I suspect would have caused confusion to stop that recount too, except we had observers from the CARICOM, observer mission from the OAS, from the various ABC countries every day. And because of that, they couldn't stop that recount. So what happened is, instead of Mr. Lowenfield summarizing, all he had to do was take it and say, well, you know, what the observations were: 10 people died and voted, 15 migrated and voted. That's all that was required of him, a summary of what was said over the 33 days. Mr. Lowenfield went further than that, Keith Lowenfield, and he did a summary and offered an opinion. Now, his opinion is heavily skewed in favor of the AP and UAFC. I don't think there's any hiding that or diplomatic way to say it. We can now be sure, where people were in doubt before, that Mr. Lowenfield was a good, decent, honest man, public servant doing his job, because many of us still thought so. He had disappeared. So at least many of us thought he had disappeared and allowed Roxanne Myers to do the bad work, the nasty work, and that he was not comfortable with himself doing it. Now I think it has become clear that Mr. Lowenfield has been in this jumble for a long time. So he's offered an opinion. The opinion is ill-informed. It does not take into consideration facts. He essentially repeats everything that the AP and UAFC said. He does not take into consideration other commentaries made by other parties, such as that Mr. Mingo inflated the numbers. That does not appear anywhere on his report. He did not hear from any of the parties that he accused of being out of the country. Mr. Lowenfield essentially got a complaint, sat down and heard that complaint by himself, decided on it by himself, didn't hear the other side, which would be the people who were being accused of committing electoral fraud, didn't put any consideration, didn't have any evidence before him, didn't have all the evidence before him, and made a decision. And then upon making that decision, he decided he was going to be executioner too, and kill the PPP and the PPP's supporters, and kill the will of the people of this country. Because the will of the people of this country, if given effect, would see the People's Progressive Party in office. So he decided he would do that, and he offered an opinion, and he's now a laughingstock across the country. A laughingstock that is seen as highly dishonest and wicked and evil, and he's lost his reputation right there. So we'll talk a little bit later about some of the ridiculous numbers he gave, but that's essentially what happened. So where we are now, Eddie, is we are to go, he has given the report to the commission. The commission has before it the accurate numbers of the recount. The numbers of the recount are very clear. The PPPC is leading by 15,416 votes, leading the APNU by that, and leading the combined opposition parties are leading the APNU by more than 24,000 votes. So they lost by more than 24,000 votes. And the commission has those figures before it. The commission has one job and one job only: to declare the winner of these elections based on the numbers of the recount. And so that's what we expect Claudette Singh, retired Justice Claudette Singh, chairman of the Elections Commission, to sit with her commissioners, consider over the next few days, and before the 16th of June, which would be Tuesday, declare the winner of these elections. Irfan Ali at this stage is deemed the president of the country because he simply, the party, the list upon which he ran, received the most numbers twice, in the count and in the recount. And the Constitution is clear on that. When you run an election, if you're not running alone, then the party who receives the most votes is deemed the president, and then we just wait on the formality of the chairman making the declaration.
Thanks, Priya. Joe, I'm going to bring you in here for some opening comments because I think people are still, before you go, people are still, the media houses and so forth, are still trying to analyze and rationalize what Mr. Mingo said, what Mr. Lowenfield put in his report. I'm going to bring you in for some opening comments before we get deeper into this, because I just saw another publication coming out with some more bizarre kind of information from Mr. Lowenfield's report. So, Joe.
Two things, Eddie, I want to start off with. One is, if anyone had in their heads the thought that David Granger was not the mastermind behind the rigging of elections, last night or whenever he spoke on Ben's Corp Radio, should confirm to every Guyanese that everything that was happening every step of the way since the night of the 2nd of March, Granger was very much active, coordinating and instructing, and being briefed on their attempt to rig these elections when they recognized they lost the election, because there were still some people in there, even up to this moment, who are of the view that Granger is being deceived by Armand or somebody. Now you have to put that in context, because this game plan is Granger's game plan. And I take viewers back to 2017 when Granger spoke to the Atlanta chapter of the People's National Congress. He said two important things to them. One, before you all badgering me, the PNC must determine two things: how we won elections and how we stayed in government. The first part they had accomplished. That is, they got elected via coalition, the same way Barnum got elected via coalition with De Geer in 1964. And the second issue was how we stay in government. How the PNC stayed in government for 28 years is via control of the Elections Commission and through rigged elections. And the attempt to foist Patterson on the people of Guyana was an attempt to control the Elections Commission. But even though Patterson had to go because of the court ruling, the elements were still there. The conspirators, they were still there at the highest level of the Elections Commission. Secondly, as Priya just mentioned, if people had any thought that perhaps Lowenfield was not a participant in Mingo and Myers' doing, today we are clear that the chief mastermind and conspirator on behalf of APNU in the Elections Commission machinery is one Pete Lowenfield. So those two things are clear as crystal now to Guyanese, Because if a man, Eddie, and I say this, people like Lowenfield should not be in public office. They should be at Mazaruni prison. Because if a man can be so brazen and bold to attempt to do what he's attempting on behalf of his political handlers, you don't need those type of people to be in office at the highest level in state institutions. When a man is capable, and you know, it looked like the words of the former Jamaican Prime Minister is really resounding. All of these guys, they have this, what type of mind, Golding said? Creative mind.
Courageous mind.
Courageous mind. All of these guys, they have this courageous mind. And as we go along in the program, some of the things you would see, what this report is saying, suggests that you have to have a very courageous and I would say devious mind. Because when a man, just to please his political handlers, would impugn the integrity and character of his staff, nearly 10,000 people, basically saying that they were involved or in election fraud and election malpractices. That is basically what he's saying. And secondly, when a man can say to the Guyanese people and confess that I am incompetent and inept because I was responsible for this election machinery, that all of this fraud and anomalies and all the irregularities happen. But it shows how devious the mind is, and all of that is because he wants to suggest to his political handlers that perhaps they could have won. And importantly, again, it's another lie and another false hope giving today to the APNU supporters. You would note that after GECOM finished several days ago, the circuit, social media circuit was very quiet with APNUites. You would note that today after Lowenfield fiction, you would note that many of them, they have come alive because what Lowenfield has done is to give them some false hope again. But what is the reality? An election got three components. One, preparation that includes primarily creating a voters list, because without an election, you can't have, without a voters list, you can't have election. Two, the vote itself on election day. And three, the declaration of the winner of those elections. So the false hope Lowenfield is attempting to give to APNUites tonight, that is going to be thrown into the basket very shortly, because if the chairman don't declare the winner, then what? You know, what? I mean, no one has put anything in place. You know, they talk of, no one has put any legal thing in place to say if there isn't a declaration of the man that is deemed to be president as regards the Constitution winning, he and his party list by 15,416 votes, what else? And that is the issue. What else? I mean, people are saying, tell us what, you keep Ranger in government with no parliament, no budget? I mean, you know, people say, okay, new elections.
The Constitution, the laws don't anticipate anything else but a declaration. Let me just be very clear. Our law says if you're at war, if there is some natural disaster, if there is a draw, two parties run or three parties and everybody ties, they tell you what to do. The laws have specifically addressed that. It never contemplated and therefore never made a provision for anyone to say, we don't, for Claudette, or anybody else to say we don't like what the result says about one party or the other, and so we're not going to make a declaration. That is not allowed in our law. So there are no choices here. She has to make a declaration, and it has to be based on the numbers that she has. And she has numbers twice. She has numbers from the count on E-night as well as from the count on the recount. And both of the numbers are very, very similar, very clear that the PPP won the elections with an excess of 15,400 votes. And so there's really no choice for the Elections Commission. They have to do it. But, you know, Eddie, if you could just, let's look at a little bit of that table you were putting up, the vulgarity of Keith Lowenfield. He's essentially saying, look, right now we know.
This is the one with Lowenfield.
Right. So I want to take us through this a little bit quickly. 460,352 persons actually cast their ballot. Mr. Lowenfield is trying to disenfranchise 275,000 persons by saying that only 185,000 of those votes will be, this number, 185,260, are credible and will be recognized. And of that amount, the PPP only got 56,627, and the PNC, well, the APNU AFC PNC got 125,010, in effect making the AFC winners, but the APNU AFC winners. But let's look at how vulgar that is. Let's look at Region 9. Region 9, 12,261 persons came out and voted. The vulgarity here, you're telling 10,000 of those people that they did not vote and their votes will not count, and you're going to count only 2,432 votes. That's disenfranchising from one region. 10,000 persons. How do you live with yourself? Some of these people had to travel long hours, had to go in canoes, had to go on horseback, had to walk, had to spend money from where they were to go back home to vote. And you're telling them now you're not going to count their votes. If you think that's vulgar, let's look at Region 6. And this here is the height of vulgarity. In Region 6, 64,000, look at it there on your table, 64,567 persons voted, valid votes cast. Mr. Lowenfield is reducing that to 14,615. He's taking away from thousands of persons in Region 6 their votes. But if you think that's vulgar, look at the vulgarity in Region 6. Mr. Lowenfield, where the PPP actually won by more than 22,000 votes on the recount, Mr. Lowenfield is giving the APNU AFC 9,437 votes and the PPP 5,021 votes. He is telling this country that the APNU AFC won Region 6. Can you imagine that vulgar? It's almost like they want trouble on their hands. How can you say that to a nation? Region 5. Look at Region 5's figures. 33,119,000 persons voted. In Region 5, the PPP got on the statement of poll and on the recount 14,502 votes. And the APNU got 14,502 votes, and the PPP got look at it right there. The PPP got 18,326 votes. In the recount, in Mr. Lowenfield's figures that he put up today, he is suggesting that the APNU got 8,864 votes and the PPP got 7,378 votes. He is saying the APNU AFC won in Region 5. He's saying the APNU AFC won in Region 6. These are not only vulgar expressions of theft on paper here. They're also dangerous.
I think Priya, what he did worse than what Mingo did, because he is giving overall the APNU AFC 60% of the votes, the 185,000, and the PPPC 30.5.
Yeah, I think Mr. Lowenfield.
Importantly, Eddie, what is giving APNU AFC a 2/3 majority in the National Assembly?
Exactly.
That is what this fiction is attempting to do. So now Granger can rule, you know, without parliamentary scrutiny. So I mean, we're going back to Desmond Hoyt in 1985 when the election was rigged. And so you shiver when you see these things people are attempting to do in 2020. And what kind of people these people are. I mean, how do you attempt to do that? Now, in 2015, 415 or 16,000 people voted. In 2020, when more people would have been registered to vote, who became 18 and of age to vote, this guy is suggesting that less than half of the amount of persons, are you understand me, are valid votes in 2020.
Mr. Granger, right, Mr. Granger assumed office with 412,000 persons voting in 2015. They want to tell us in 2020, when they had so hurt people that people resolved, who stayed home the last time because they might have been a little upset with the PPP or whatever, resolved that they were going to come out and throw them out of office. When the whole country and the world dubbed this the mother of all elections, he wants to tell us that there's 412 valid votes that got counted in 2015 when they assumed office, Mr. Granger, that all of a sudden it was reduced to 185,000 votes, and you expect the people of this country or the rights-loving people in the world to believe that and to accept that and to allow Mr. Lowenfield to walk around this place and this country and this world as though he has some integrity left in him. You know, we name the names of Lowenfield and Mingo, but they're not acting alone, and they're not acting for themselves, and they're not acting by themselves. They are acting on and behalf of David Granger and all the APNU AFC leaders to keep them in office. That's what's happening here. And this is another attempt to rig the elections. It's not going to be allowed. It's not going to be tolerated. And we've already, it's there. It's clear for everyone to see. So what we have now is Claudette Singh is going to have to sit down and decide with her commissioners if she wants to say that elections that she ran and that she said on the 3rd of March, is a nice video playing all over, that she said on the 3rd of March that the elections were free and fair and credible, and she had a very pleasant smile on her face, and she looked like she thought it was a great accomplishment, which indeed it was, because it was a big election all across the country, and it was free and fair and credible. And we have the entire world.
Maybe I should play that video before we go further.
Well, please do. We have the whole world say, there it is.
Let me just start it. So go ahead.
But what I will tell you, our elections were, as promised, GECOM has delivered free, fair, and credible elections. And now I will handle. But what I will tell you.
So there you had it, Priya. The
GECOM has delivered free, fair, and credible elections. There you have it. That's what she said.
Importantly,
before you go, Joe, before you go, I have a question. I'm still going back to these magic numbers. I think Mr. Lowenfield has outdone Claire McMingo.
Mr. Lowenfield outdid everybody in the 80s. They didn't rig this much in the 80s.
My question really, Priya, is when you look at the number that he said, 185,000, in my mind, I would like for Mr. Lowenfield to explain to me what exactly happened with the 275,092 other voters.
No, but Eddie,
are they dead? Joe, before, are they dead? Have they migrated? What exactly happened to them?
Importantly, in the confusion in his head and his handler's head is this. He submitted the report of the numbers that his officers signed on to, And by putting it in the report for the commission, he has signed on to it. And those districts said valid votes recounted. That is what the all the statement of recount they said from district 1 to 10. These were the valid votes recounted. And the supervisor for the district signed off on that, who was authorized on behalf of the Guyana Elections Commissions to do that. Mr. Lowenfield took those 10 numbers together and he tabulated it and he put before the commission the authentic report of the recount of valid votes cast. So all of these nonsensical things in this observation summary, that is what it is. And for viewers, the important issue, the important thing, the important item in the report is that report of the recount, because the recount settled all the issues we had before about numbers, about which number is right and which number is wrong and which declaration is right or wrong. All of us agreed to a recount, and coming out of the recount, as they finished a district, they did the report and GECOM signed on to the report, and the report indicates that these are valid votes recounted. Mr. Lowenfield and his help and the cabal, they can't wish that away. They can't wish away 233,000 votes declared via the recount. So the recount put everything to rest when you went into the boxes and counted the ballots. All the other things, lay them aside. So importantly, for me, with all the other things, what is before the commission is the report coming out of the recount exercise.
The numbers.
Valid votes that were recounted. All the other things, and Priya would know more than I do, all the other things, it is for a court of law to make determination about them. The thing that Claudette Singh and the commission have to make determination about to do a declaration, it is the numbers presented to them by the chief elections officer.
Right.
That this.
So remember, right, when I was saying earlier, he had two jobs. One, to give the numbers that were being counted over the 33 days. This is what these numbers are. And to give a summary. Well, you know, they complained that 5 people had died and 10 people had migrated, and 2 polling agents didn't write up a book or something. That's the summary he was required to give. Mr. Lowenfield was not required to give an opinion. So his opinion based on that summary is superfluous. It doesn't matter. It's extraneous. It is fat. You can cut it off. It's not the meat of what he was supposed to do. You understand what I'm trying to say? So he could give that opinion and 10 other opinions. It doesn't matter. The thing that they have to consider is there was an election. People came out to vote. Did you count all the valid ballots? How did we know a ballot was valid? Every single ballot that was recounted was passed under a particular UV light, because that's one of the security features. You would recall that we printed ballots as a country in the Canadian, in Canada, in the place that prints currency and money. And so they had a whole set of security features. They had to make sure each ballot that was being counted was legitimate. And once the ballot was legitimate, it was stamped and it was properly marked. That is what they're counting. Now, if they didn't find any illegitimate ballots, like any fake ballots, where the ballots were not marked, they didn't count it for either the PPP or the APNU. And so all the numbers, those 460,352 valid votes cast, are before the commission now, and they're divided by between APNU, PPP, and smaller, newer parties. And the numbers are very clear. So Mr. Claremont Mingo has, Mr. Lowenfield
is the same person. All of them is the same people.
Right.
They're no different than the other.
Mr. Lowenfield has fulfilled the important part of his job in presenting those numbers. The thing is, did he want to do it? Probably not, but he couldn't get away from it because that happened on live TV. It happened on the World Wide Web. We all saw it as it was unfolding. So he gave those numbers, and then he tried to negate the numbers by saying they weren't credible. And I want to examine that a little bit. Like I said, I don't care what he thinks, and the commission ought not to care what he thinks because it is superfluous. It doesn't matter. He didn't arrive at that through any sensible process. Let us talk about how we arrived at those numbers. The APNU AFC said people died and they came to vote. Up to this morning, a girl named Shawnette Moore, I believe I saw on Facebook, saying, what the hell is this? This is my aunt. This death certificate that you all have provided here is my aunt, and she's alive. What sorcery is this? That's what I saw. I mean, people feel almost like you're calling death on them. That is up to this morning. There are names that appeared on a list that the coalition said migrated. These are names that were sent to the Commission of Police. Amongst them is a girl, a young professional in Guyana named Ramona Chandrabali. Another young professional, funnily enough, both of them are girls, both of them are in the science field. Another young lady that just casually looking at the list and saw their names. They have done affidavits and videos saying we're here, we're alive, we're well, we weren't away, we voted. Mr. Lowenfield has ignored all of that. He's included all of that in these numbers that present that he wants to say made the system incredible or incredulous, not believable, and not something that we can trust. And that's not, so that tells you, Eddie, that he is not taken on the role. Even if he wanted to go outside what he was supposed to do, he didn't do it properly. So we don't care, the Guyanese people don't care. And the GECOM commission should not be caring what Mr. Lowenfield's view is on these matters. What they should care about is whether he added up these figures accurately. And we are confirming that we have seen his report, and he did add the figures up accurately, and that's what they have to look at. That's what they have to pay attention to. They don't have jurisdiction to investigate themselves. So GECOM can't say, well, we conducted these elections really like a lot of very, very incompetent people who are also lacking in intellectual capacity. In other words, they're done. They can't say we did that, we made all these mistakes, and we're going to look at it ourselves and decide ourselves whether we were right or wrong. Our laws are very clear. Any question that arises about the validity of an election, and when you're saying that 275 persons, we're not going to count their votes because we don't think they were here, we think they voted fraudulently, we don't think their votes can be validated, you're talking about validity. Validate, validity. And any question about the validity of an election goes straight to the High Court, where we have people who are trained to determine, well, first of all, to employ proper procedures in hearing an allegation and then determining whether that allegation is accurate or not. So if you go to the court is not going to ignore Ramona Chandrabali when she says, look, I'm right here. The court is not going to ignore the lady who they say died and she's presenting herself like Mr. Lowenfield has done. They're not going to ignore these people. They're going to hear them. They're going to invite them for a hearing. They're going to see their documents. They're going to heed those documents. And then they're going to say, well, these allegations are not proven. GECOM does not have the ability to do that. But it's not even whether they have the ability. Let's say we had the brightest, most well-trained lawyers at GECOM. GECOM does not have the authority to do it. The only people we have given the authority to in this country to inquire into the validity of an election is the Supreme Court of Guyana. And that is where it has to go if there are any questions about the validity of votes. Mr. Lowenfield cannot sit down by himself, whether is it is at his desk or at Congress Place, and tell 275,092 people that he's going to disenfranchise them just because he feels like it, and he's going to hand the APNU a 2/3 majority in the parliament. He's simply not going to be allowed to do that. I don't see any.
Well, if you go through, Eddie, if you go through the report, the region district reports, and you look at this guy attempting statistical fiction. He and Vincent Alexander and Corbyn, they sit down and they're doing extrapolation based on allegation. And they're coming up. I mean, when I saw that, what could be going through these people's head? Who got 0.1%? Who got, they're doing that, you know. They're doing this without no evidence.
And that's the point. That's the point, Joe.
The
all these allegations, they're mere allegations that were made by APNU AFC.
Yes.
Not a single shred of evidence. Mr. Lowenfield has elevated those allegations as though there was a barrage of evidence. Hence, he was able to
based on this allegation that he elevated to evidence, he can take action because he is saying, listen, you had 52 anomalies in this box and it affected so many votes. And based on the fact that it affected so many votes, I keep Lowenfield and Alexander and Corbyn, and I can see Corbyn handling it. And Alexander, we are going to extrapolate the numbers that we are saying that is valid, and we're going to give it out to the different parties based on our understanding about how it should be extrapolated. And as Priya said, forget about all the other citizens and electors who voted and their votes were in that box. They don't matter. Of 75, we would only say 25 is valid. And we will determine how do you determine?
I mean, very good question, Joe. Because how do you determine, you know, which of these votes are invalid?
Yes, that is point. This guy, you know,
the count has already eliminated votes that are invalid via spoiled ballots, want of official mark, etc., etc. How did he arrive and know which votes?
Which votes go to which party? You know, Sales Conrad said it very nicely in a post. He said a report Lowenfield has made himself the commission. He had made himself the court and even God. Because
and the electorate.
Yes, he's made himself that he's determining how many votes will go to which party based on my extrapolation with what I call the valid votes in a box. I mean, it is so ridiculous. You know, if it's not so serious, it's a big pantomime. That is what it is.
But Priya, you know, surely Mr. Lowenfield has a chance with all this information that he has in terms of what he thinks about these baseless allegations, elevating them to evidence. He has an opportunity after the declaration, and he can join the APNU AFC. He can be a witness for them. He can be their star witness in the courts when they file.
I found it very disappointing that he presented that kind of report, which essentially says I was a failure from day one. I was a failure from the people I hired. I was a failure all through the training because this is his responsibility. I was a failure all through the assigning. I was a failure all through the supervising. I was a failure through the counting. I was a complete failure, but I will still stay on this job and hand over a report, and a report that says this. I mean, I'd have expected a decent person to have handed in the report with a resignation, but he didn't do that, and he's not decent. And that's why we have to, and by we, I mean the citizens of this country, all of us will have to decide what we want. We cannot. I refuse to accept that every single election we're going to be putting our human citizens, our people through this kind of pain. We cannot accept that there's one person who's corrupt or two, because I don't think the AP and UAFC and the PNC changing for now. They will try to corrupt the system as much as they can, simply because, and this for me is simply because they can't win people's hearts. They can't win people's confidence. They're going to have to try to corrupt the system. So we can't have a one Mr. Lowenfield who is going to come and negate 460,352,000 votes, 460,352 persons who voted, who took the time to be good citizens, who informed themselves and decided what they want for their country. He can't negate that because of scampishness and crookishness and gangstering, whether it is sanctimonious gangstering or not. And so we are going to have to decide as a country how we're going forward. And I'm very sure that it doesn't matter who people support. Nobody is going to countenance us being punished like this and suffering like this after every election. And so with Mr. Lowenfield and that kind of activity around GECOM, I mean, the one good thing here is that he's helped to purge GECOM of all the crooks, the gangsters in there, because I don't see after this report where he says this about his supervisory staff that we can keep them, frankly, or that they would want to stay on in that job. And that is why, Eddie, the legislators, when they said that GECOM does not have the ability to investigate these claims, that it must be done at the High Court, is because of that. One of the things that might have been in their heads is that GECOM will be infected or could be infected by a corrupt or 10 corrupt people who don't like the result they're seeing, and they'll give a report like what Lowenfield is giving. The law doesn't allow him the liberty to give that. Him or anybody else, John Doe or Mary Jane or Babulal. It says that if you have all you must do is sit down and count these votes. And you must count them in front of polling agents and in front of observers. And so if you don't have a recount like we had here, because that must be transparent. And once that count is finished, if somebody has a problem with what they think happened regarding the validity, they must go to the High Court, because the law does not want people to suffer. The legislators, when they made that law, did not want people to suffer 3-4 months while some party is holding you hostage and refuses to come out of office. The law did not give any person in GECOM or the commission the ability to investigate and look into these matters, these allegations and these claims, because all the law wanted was an election and a determination of that election that resulted in a swearing in as little time as possible. And that is why they were never given the powers, not a Lowenfield, not a Roxanne Myers, not a Claudette Singh, not a Robeson Ben, none of them. They're not given the powers to look into any allegations that are made regarding the validity of the election. Those claims, those allegations, the investigation thereof, the interrogation of those must happen in a High Court where there's a trained judge after a declaration is made and a president sworn in, because the lawmakers anticipated they wanted a country moving while these processes were happening. And particularly, I suspect, to stop a Lowenfield type from hijacking the whole country, from throwing us all into turmoil because he don't like who win. You can't do that. Nowhere in the world is that allowed. And everywhere in the world, election systems are manned by human beings who will have their own personal views. And that's why these systems are put into place, so that personalities and personal choices cannot negate the will of the people. They don't have the authority to do that.
But Priya, before you go, Joe, I wanted to make the point based on what all of what you would have said, Priya. You talked about what Lowenfield can and cannot do and so forth. I think the reality is, when one looks at the report that Mr. Lowenfield put together, it is clearly a AP and UAFC propaganda. It fits directly into their narrative, what has been put together there. And I believe, my personal belief is, the law doesn't allow even the chair and the commission itself to even contemplate anything outside of making a declaration with regards to the numbers. So I suspect when the commission meets to examine both reports, and we have to recognize the fact that there are two separate reports per se. One that has the tabulation of, even though they go together, one that has the tabulation of the numbers, and one a summary of those allegations by APNU AFC. So I suspect that the Justice Claudette Singh and the Commission will focus on what they have to do by law, and maybe ignore the propaganda by Mr. Lowenfield, which fits into what the APNU AFC wants. That is all we can hope, that they stick.
Well, I think she's going to have to be strong. So I want to say that, because the propaganda has been carried not only by people who behave and look like thieves, but the propaganda has been carried by suit-wearing, tie sporting. They have on a suit and a tie and a kerchief in their pocket, and they look very fancy. That propaganda and that theft has been promoted by people who look like that. And she has three of those persons on the commission. I'm extremely disappointed. I mean, look, let me tell you, you grew up with people like Vincent Alexander around you, and he has been PNC, and I don't care. You could vote for whoever you want to vote for. I consider it my fault if I can't persuade you to vote for me. Not your fault. It's your right. Vincent Alexander, I recall distinctly, we had asked, because the PPP used to do that, the PNC, APNU never did it while we were in opposition. We asked for an opposition nominee for the National Accreditation Council, and his own party didn't put him up. I think they had some problem. Him and Corbyn had some fight or something going on. They didn't put him up, and they gave me another name, and I appointed that person, and I, of my own volition, appointed, I think, as my nominee, Vincent Alexander, because he's a decent man. He has this institutional knowledge. He can contribute to this thing. He has, he knows the work. He's gonna do what's good for Guyana. Now you're seeing these people, they're nothing more than common thieves. He is nothing more than a common thief. He's a disappointment. Mr. Trotman, I remember him standing, protesting loudly at the top of his voice about rights and Walter Rodney. And I mean, today's
People's
Walter
power,
Rodney,
no dictator.
People's power, no dictator. Today's Walter Rodney's death anniversary. And he sits there trying to do the opposite of what his founder leader lived and died for, lived and was murdered for. He's serving the people who assassinated his founder leader, and doing in that service, robbing the people of this country of their very will. Mr. Alexander is going to, and Mr. Trotman and Mr. Corbyn, I don't know him very much, but he's Robert Corbyn's brother. They're going to sit there and they're going to try to twist the arm of the chairperson, because they have no integrity, they have no decency, they have no honesty, and they are in with this theft as much as the choke and robber on the street, as much as the person who will snatch your gold chain at Stabroek Market. And so she's going to have to be strong. She's going to have to bring to bear her knowledge of fairness, her knowledge of public law principles, such as that if you're going to accuse John Doe and Mary Jane and Punwati Lal of not being in Guyana, you first have to hear them and listen to what they say about whether they were here or not before you take away their votes. She's going to have to bring her knowledge about what the law says, which is that GECOM has no ability to investigate itself, and that any question about validity must go to the High Court. And so it's not going to be, and I do not anticipate that it's going to be an easy decision for her, but I believe she was chosen for a reason. She was chosen because she has the reputation of being a strong woman who can function and manage by herself. She herself said she was known as the Iron Lady. And so I expect that Justice Singh is going to come through for the people of this country. And it's not one set of people. Doing the right thing here will benefit all of Guyana. PNC supporters, APNU supporters, PPP supporters, Black people, Indian people, Christian people, Hindu people, Muslim people. It will benefit the people of Guyana. Conversely, if she does not do the right thing, all the people of Guyana will suffer and suffer equally. The only people who will benefit from this are a very small cabal in the leadership of the AP and UAFC. They don't number more than 200. So she would not be supporting or helping PNC or APNU supporters here, because once this country goes south, once our economy crashes as we're where we're at right now, it's everybody that suffers. You saw in the last 2 months when people can't put food on their table because of the COVID lockdown and loss of jobs and so on. It didn't discriminate. We're gonna make sure PNC people got food on their table. That didn't happen. They gave no subsidies to anyone, and everybody suffered equally. And so theft of an election, a government that is not viewed as legitimate, we've already been told by the international community how they will treat with that. They will treat anyone who benefits from results that do not recognize the will of the people, that do not give effect to the way people voted. They will treat that government as illegitimate, and sanctions will begin to flow. You heard from John Beale, from a former ambassador of Barbados. You heard from former Prime Minister Owen Arthur. You heard from former Prime Minister Bruce Golden. You heard from present sitting Prime Minister from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Mr. Gonzalez. You've heard from all of them about what would happen to us. We're going to be seen as the pariahs of the Commonwealth, of CARICOM, of the OAS. Nobody's going to want to have anything to do with us. And unfortunately, Ms. Granger is an old man. It's not going to affect him. It's going to affect the potential our young people in this beautiful country has. And that's why we must all rise up in one voice to stop this. We have said before, we ain't going anywhere. The PPP is right here and we're going to fight this. And so I expect from Justice Singh that she's going to bring all of her knowledge, bring the very reasons she was appointed, her integrity, her knowledge of the law, her ability to filter out sense from nonsense amidst all the noise, and shut down the 3 men who are going to try to be fighting her off over the next 2 days to do something that is not only illegal and wrong, but that would harm and hurt so many people. She's going to have to bring up from her belly all that she's made of to put Guyana right. And I expect her to do it.
Joe,
the thing is, Eddie,
your floor to close the program.
Yes, the thing is, as indicated by Owen Arthur yesterday, former Prime Minister of Barbados, that all eyes around the world is on Claudette Singh. That is because what are the facts? The facts are the world is aware, based on the numbers since the 3rd of March, and reconfirmed by the recount that everyone agreed to, that the People's Progressive Party Civic won these elections of March 2nd. And any other thing that suggests differently would not create good conditions. And as I said earlier, failing to declare the results, what else can happen? What next GECOM can, I'm wrestling with myself. What in law can be a substitute to the declaration? Because elections got 3 components, as I said when I started. 1, preparation, getting a voters list together. 2, voting on election day. And 3, declaration of the results of the winner of the elections. And everyone around the world is confident that the list headed by Irfan Ali won these elections by 15,416 votes. That is, you can't change that. That is the reality of the situation. And Lowenfield cannot do a Mingo again, trying to give Granger a win when the ballots were counted that indicated that Irfan Ali is deemed to be president of the Republic.
Joe, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Priya, thanks as well for being part of this program. Unfortunately, our time has expired. Our 1 hour has quickly vanished. we could have gone some more, but maybe another time. So, Joe, Priya, thanks for being part of the program this evening.
Well, thanks for having me.
Good night again, Priya.
Joe?
Good night.
And thanks to our viewers for joining us. Have a good rest of the evening. Bye for now.